Well, hi, everybody. Everybody, there we are. Okay, as we're coming onto the stage, hi, everybody out there in the universe behind the pillars, especially you behind the pillars. So excited that you're there way back there. Okay, good. So, mentorship. I know it's a topic that you're probably at least conceptually familiar with. The individuals to my right, who will introduce themselves here in a minute, are mentors or have been mentors in many different capacities or different times in their life, and of course have been a mentee themselves. So we thought it would be really fascinating to bring people up who have found themselves in a mentorship position, who have also spent a lot of times as a mentee themselves, to talk about some of the practices, things they've done, experiences they've had, and just have a touch of real talk around the subject matter. Now, throughout this entire conference, there's a lot of moments in which the topic of mentorship, continued learning keeps coming up. And like Chelsea said, this is super valuable and important because of that lifelong learning that we're all going through. So I hope that for you, whether you identify as a mentor or mentee at this point in time, that you can hear from them, from their stories, things that you might be able to put into practice tomorrow in your life and in the work that you bring back. The more welcoming and inviting we can make this community, the bigger and healthier it will grow. That's the goal. Simple as that. You with me? Okay, very good. Okay, so let's get this party started. I'm going to start here to my far right with John, and we'll just move our way down here. If you could, just, again, give us your name, pronouns if you would, as well as where you're coming from, the job you have, and a brief history in this community.
Sure thing. Okay. I'm John Sowers, he, him. Let's see. I work at Privia Health. I'm a senior manager. I manage a team of Rails developers as well as a mobile team. And like my position in this community, I've been coming for, I don't know, more than 10 years now. And so now it's just a conference full of old friends and new faces that I get to meet. Anything else I need to add there?
The source of your hair.
The source of my hair?
No, I'm just kidding. I just
comes right out of my head. I don't have
right out of your head. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ebun. I am a software engineer at Shopify. I work mostly in the fulfillment team. This is actually my first RailsConf, and I'm so excited to be here. Is there anything else?
You're good to go.
Okay.
Hello. Hi. My name is Shayna Moore. I'm from San Diego, and I work for a company called Scientist.com. In particular, I'm a senior engineer and lead for a team that focuses on consultancy portion of the company. And she and her. Anything else?
Good to go.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Guzman, he, him pronouns. I am a full stack engineer at Zeal. I'm also a senior mentor through our residency program, partnered with Fine Tune, where I help basically kind of lead the team as a senior mentor / tech lead within that program. And this is actually my first in-person RailsConf, so I'm super excited.
Right on. So almost any journey we go through is going to start in the beginning, wherever that is. So I want to start with a question around the first experiences that you can recall when I say mentor. What was the first mentorship experience you had? And I want to hear from each of you. So we'll start at the end there. John, one come to mind? First mentorship experience?
Yeah, for me, it was when I started working as a mentor at the Block.io online bootcamp. So a friend of mine was working there already and said, hey, do you want to also do some of this? And I felt like I had enough experience at that point that I could begin sharing it with people. So I just sort of dove right into that role and started there.
For me, when I hear mentor, the first experience that comes to mind was university. So I'm originally from Nigeria, and I moved to Canada for university. And it was such a huge change, new educational system, new country, new weather. I don't know if you've heard about the weather in Canada, but it's not nice. Um, most times, but it's nice right now. It's getting nicer. Anyways, so going into university and with all these huge changes, I had a student mentor who basically helped me with navigating that new space and all of that. And it made such a huge difference that the following year I volunteered to be a student mentor for international students.
Okay. For me, I don't have a technical degree. And so I'm a career changer. And long story short, I found myself unemployed and happened to have had a neighbor who was a Rails developer. And she had invited me, I didn't know anything, I didn't know what Rails was. She invited me to something called Rails Camp. Yeah, Rails Camp, where a bunch of devs went out like in the woods and camped. But basically my relationship with her, I feel, introduced me to this space and meeting everyone and just being super involved in the community kind of ever since is what I first think of.
Out of quick curiosity, how many of you are familiar with Rails Camp? Any former Rails campers out there? Interesting. That's cool. Anyway, Eric.
So my first experience was as a mentee. So I didn't do great in high school. So I went to community college, and there was no one in my life that was anywhere near technical. And I just remember like my community college professors, they were just so, because it was like small classrooms, going to their office hours or just talking with them, they were very human and just, asking the questions, talking about the challenges, and they just help you. And they were just so authentic that it warmed me up to doing programming, because prior to that, it was just something I just wanted to try. And by them talking about it, by them being more human and, just talking about themselves, I felt more comfortable. And that's vividly, I really latched on. I still talk to my community college professor to this day.
So I'm curious about those first mentorship experiences you had on the mentee side of it. And this is open to anyone. Are there any practices that stood out or behaviors that stood out at the time that maybe even at that time, I don't know that it would be fair to call them off-putting, but they kind of challenged you a little bit? I wouldn't say made you, inappropriately feel uncomfortable, make you feel a little uncomfortable, but they pushed you as a mentee. Any of those practices or any of those from those early mentorship experiences come to mind?
I can think of something. So at some point when I was a mentee as an international student, it started to feel mechanical and not authentic. And I know I took note of that at that point. Now, I'm not blaming anyone, because as a student, it's a lot just being a student. And so I had some grace for my mentor at the time. But then when I decided the following year to become a student mentor, I remember just saying I have to make sure that it feels authentic, and I have to make sure that I meet my mentees at the point where they are at, and just communicate openly with them. Also just letting them know, hey, I have my own responsibilities, but I'm gonna be there for you as much as I can be.
So that open communication component of it from both the mentor as well, is that what I heard you say?
100% communication.
So did you ever feel at any point in time that your mentor was uncertain about their abilities, or did they come across as like even for your professor as well, did you feel like they identified with having a ton of confidence, or did you also feel kind of their level of inexperience coming to the plate as well?
He wasn't afraid to say, I don't know, let me look into that, which kind of, coming when you're approaching your professor or whoever it is, you expect them to just have all the answers. But for them just to say, you know what, hold on, let me look that up. And then he'll just pull a book off his shelf and then just open it up and find something that was it's kind of like you don't realize how eye-opening that actually is. Like those little tiny interactions help a lot to humanize the experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How about for you?
I mean, my mentee experiences were all long time ago and mostly full of anti-patterns. So the one that I'm thinking of is my mentor this was sort of extracurricular work on my first steps into programming, and he had been doing it for, I don't know, he was like 65 or something. He'd been doing it for a really long time, and that experience gap was so huge he couldn't really empathize with me not knowing things. And so he'd say, here's how it works, blah, 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 blah. You understand? And I would be like, do I? I don't. And I would say, uh-huh. And then like we would move on and I wouldn't have really gotten it. And then I didn't have that safety to be able to say, no, wait, I don't quite get it. Please say that exact thing again. And that's always fed into my mentorship, is wanting to make that comfortable for people to understand that they can bring all that uncertainty. We can explain it 5 different ways until we get it.
That story reminds me of experiences of when mentors explain things with the word just, as if it's so simple.
Yeah.
And it might have been simple at the time, but it kind of hurts your ego a little bit because you don't understand it.
That little word just. Yeah. Any other kind of phrases like that kind of fall into that category of kind of ineffective because they kind of trivialize the actual work that has gone into it? We've got just, should. Those are always fun ones too. Yeah. I always find it interesting that we label things so much as experienced and senior and junior and inexperienced, yet like what you're pointing out, Eric, and John, you sort of mentioned this on the opposite end of that a great mentor shows how they go through their process of finding an answer to a question or exploring their options. They're not just a walking encyclopedia of everything. And arguably, to your point, John, where you're talking about that gap of experience being so great that there was like a lack of empathy now for somebody going through your state of the journey because they're so far over here, and so because of that, they're not actually an effective mentor anyway. They're just the person in the room, and you're just kind of nodding your head and saying yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm curious, what could they have done that might have changed that dynamic, where they could have introduced a part of their learning or discovery and kind of built that backwards so that it would have been more accessible to you in a more junior, more inexperienced state?
That's a tough one because it partly depends on what's being worked on. Like you were saying, where you have the example where they can demonstrate, oh, I don't know that, let's look it up, or this is how I would Google for the answer, or that's incredibly useful instruction. In my situation, he had everything in his head and he was just trying to get me to know how to do it, and so there was none of that. And so that was an additional barrier into just helping me build that understanding. This was also 1990, so there was no Google. And so I think also leaving more space just for me to ask questions, or rephrasing it from "do you get it" to something like, which parts of that are sticking and which parts aren't sticking, which things connect to aren't connecting for you. So you don't have to say, yes, I understand the entire thing, no, I don't understand the entire thing. You can delve into, I got A, B, but I don't get C and D, and then F is fine. So you can actually delve into which parts aren't fully connected.
Yeah, the way I think about it is you have to come down to their level. And by their level, you have to rephrase things, because I can't, I got a computer science degree, I know all the technical terms, but they don't know all the technical terms. You got to come down, rephrase things, simplify things, and try to understand their context of their thought process. So simplify it. You could go down and say that thingy to that thingy. You have to go down to their thought level. You have to understand where they're mentally at, and go down to that spot and then instruct on that level of things. Because if you use too many big words, you already created a barrier of entry because they're just gonna, just like in school, you're just gonna wash over and be like, okay, big words, I don't know what's going on. And I pull that into even when I'm doing interviews. It's like they get stuck. And it's like don't give me the buzzwords, just tell me what you're thinking. And then I'll tell you what you probably meant and tell me if that's correct.
Well, and even the small words, right? Acronyms. Boy, I love acronyms. I'll give you my own personal experience. I was talking to Allison, wherever Allison is here. This was years ago, and she kept using the word IC. Had no clue what she was talking about. I thought like it was a total idiot. I was like, how have I been in this field for this long and have no clue what she's saying? And then she said individual contributor. And I was like, oh, I know what that is though. And so like that hiccup of that, kind of going back to what you were talking about in terms of like just or trivializing or forgetting that the accessibility point might be something as trivial as a long terminology or a long word or short word or something along those lines. So let's talk about the process a little bit. Let's talk about like establishing the relationship with mentees. How to forge trust, how to forge a kind of a very bi-directional conversation as a mentor and mentee so that you know that you're serving them, that they're feeling served. So let's start from the beginning. Yeah.
My current mentor recommended, and I've since have started implementing this with the people I mentor as well, that they should have an active participation in what they want to learn and what they want to do. So not only are you meeting them at their level, but they have that input and like they basically develop a plan for themselves so that you know that you're serving what they want. And this is kind of hard too, because especially if you're very junior, you might not know what you don't know, but you can be there to help identify, oh, maybe you should learn this next if you're interested in that.
So can we dig into the plan a little bit? Because you just brought that up. Can you speak a little bit to the structure of the plan as you understand it, or how you go about building that?
Well, this example I gave is I would feel a much more structured mentorship relationship. I would say that most of my mentorships have been much more organic than that up until this point. So I might not have the best experience too.
So with the limited understanding, do you feel like those organic relationships could have benefit from more of a plan? Or do you feel like it's kind of, you could take it both ways, leaving it to be more organic is perfectly fine by comparison to more of a structured plan? Like, where do you land?
I think it depends on the person. Yeah, I think it depends on the person. Organically, it felt more like you're talking to a friend, like you have a friendship and that type of level of trust. At my company right now, we do assign mentors and mentees, and it should be like a bi-directional. So it's not that I'm just a mentor bestowing all my knowledge onto you, but like you will also get something back from that. And I might be going on a tangent, but
we love tangents. Go for it.
I think it depends on the person.
Take the journey. Here we are. Yeah. So that's wonderful. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
I think as a mentor, if someone comes to you and they ask that you mentor them, it's because they see something in you that they like or they want to achieve. And so it's important that like initially you set like that foundation of what exactly would you like to get out of this relationship. You have to talk to them and hear them in their own words. For me, my career mentor, at our very first conversation, he just asked me, okay, so like, do you have a professional development plan? Like, do you know where exactly you want to go and what you want to do? And I was like, what is that? And so he taught me how to do that. And he showed me his, and I was so inspired. I was like, well, this is why you're my mentor, because I definitely want to be like you, or I like some of the stuff you've done. And as a result of him doing that, I was like, this is fantastic. People should hear about this. So I wrote articles teaching people how to write, how to create their own professional development plans, and how to follow up with their mentors and accountability and all of that stuff. And like, so many people came to me like, okay, I want you to be my mentor because of this, 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 and that. So it's important that at the beginning of that relationship, you figure out why exactly this person has come to you, or what exactly this person wants to learn from you.
So those core motivations, like what's the thing that's driving them? Shana, you talked about that it's a collaboration, but with them. It's not just the mentors stepping in and being like, you shall learn, ye shall learn. But instead that it's like, let's figure out where you're going. How do you map that against like where the company needs them to go, or organization or group needs them to go? Like, how do we strike a balance there so that it's beneficial to both sides of that? Or does it not matter?
So when I was working at the boot camp, there was obviously a curriculum we were following that I was mentoring the person through. So that obviously became the structure for what we were working on. But I always felt like that was a great jumping off point for the deeper questions, because you can be running through writing a controller for something, and if that's when the really interesting active record question comes up, you can tangent into that and take the opportunity to go there. But I think having that structure built out and then allowing the person's interests and their like, I've always wondered kind of questions to like fill in around that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think to your point about fitting in the expectations of the company, or like what needs to be done, as a mentor, you should also ask your mentees for their impact reviews, and like how, like what is that saying, and where like the company, like basically the reason why you need to ask for their impact reviews is because you need to know like where they need to grow and where they need to learn. So you need to know their strengths and weaknesses, but then you also need to know what exactly needs to be done in the company, so you can map those two things. So you say like, okay, let's say your weakness is like you don't know front end or something, like you don't know, or you need to get better at like back end development, and they have that feedback from their impact review, and like the company is strong on back end development or like building Rails, then you can work with them towards like increasing their strength, but also helping the company at the same time.
So it's very much like you've overlapped them.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it feels kind of like I'm visualizing kind of like this rubber band effect of like, okay, we're gonna work on this, and then it'll kind of catapult them forward for a period of time, and then you kind of do it again, and you do it again. Yeah, it's always fascinating to me because when we talk about mentorship, we talk about how critical it is to have a clear outcome. Like, what's the learning objective, the goal here? Because we can't ever forget that it's an educational experience at its core, right? We're helping somebody else level up in their place. So let's turn the tables a little bit and talk about how this can benefit the mentor. Because they're not immune to the learning, right? They're not immune to that experience as well. So let's turn this around for a second and talk about how to make the experience great for the mentor to gain something even more than just the give back aspect. Like, how should mentors approach it so that they can gain something for themselves out of it? Any thoughts there?
So I was listening, I forgot what podcast it was, but I was listening to it, and they were talking about specifically mentor-mentee relationship, and they were saying that a mentor for 100% should get something out of their relationship. It can't just be a one-way street, but it can be anything. So the examples that they gave, like if you're doing some sort of organic mentorship with someone like that's not within your company, they could send out a tweet talking about like everything they learned with the week, but include your name on there. Send you an email of all the breakdowns. So whatever helps fuel your drive and gets you feeling good is like whatever helps your drive, whatever fuels your fire is what you should get out of it. And it varies, but it vastly varies between everyone. Like the performance reports, that could be a level of a fuel for your fire, because you see that they're doing really well, you see where they're lacking, but then that gives you drive because, okay, I need to tutor them, mentor them on these aspects. one of the people I was mentoring, Kevin, he did a talk earlier today. That is 100% fuel for my fire. I'm ramped up because he was up there, he kicked ass, and I loved it. And so it's that you need to communicate that with your mentee. Tell them, I would like you to do this for me. Send me a report. Do this for me. Tweet. Write an article. Make sure to rep me a little bit. Something that just helps you. And so it's not something dirty. You need something out of it. If not, you're just gonna let it. You're gonna let it just like fizzle out. So you need something.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like, especially with juniors, it keeps me grounded, and especially when it comes to code, it reminds me that everything should be way more simple than what I usually end up writing. If they can't read code and understand, then I'm doing a disservice to everyone on my team at the end of the day. So I appreciate their perspective and just being reminded that I need to keep things simple. The other thing is, I think it's Women Who Code. They had a newsletter recently that talked about how we are we're privileged to be working in tech. As a Black woman in tech too, I'm privileged to have this position. And so being able to, I guess, do good by giving back to other people and other communities, especially that might not even had a computer growing up, that's extremely rewarding to me.
Could you expand on that a little bit? Kind of speak more to the privilege and how that's benefiting community and towards the mentor themselves. Expand on that even more so, because I feel like you're hitting on something that I would hope so many more of us would tap into as well, which is the gift we can give to one another is so powerful. That human connection that we can provide. It always worries me when I see how many organizations do almost all their communication via code review, right? Which is really powerful, don't get me wrong, but I'm like, oh man, there's that opportunity to sit, get dirty in the mud together and build, share knowledge and all those sorts of things. So I'm just really, did I ask a question at all?
Well,
No.
I can expand on what I remember of the newsletter.
Great.
That
Good.
helps.
That will help everybody. Yeah.
So in terms of being privileged, they talked about how the tech jobs and tech industry is kind of seen by society as something fancy, something to be proud of, prestigious, I suppose. But then also within the tech industry, we have resources to a pretty good salary, I would say, that a lot of other communities might not have access to. So just by wrapping up someone else outside of that community under your wing and giving them the opportunity to learn and grow and have access to those types of resources is profound and life-changing. It changed my life. So yeah, that's...
Yeah. I did ask a question, didn't I?
For a mentor, I think that something they can gain out of that relationship, mentee and mentor relationship, is feedback. So there's this statement that I hear a lot at work, that feedback is a gift, and it truly is. And if you are a mentee in this room and you have a mentor, please give them feedback, because they will get better at their job, and it will benefit you in the end, but then it will also benefit them. For me, with my with all my mentees, when they give me feedback, I learn how to be a better communicator, or to be more empathetic. That's the word, right? Yes. Basically, to practice better empathy, just to be a better person overall. I think that relationship and feedback is truly a gift, and it really helps me as a mentee, as a mentor.
So let's expand that. What's the model of feedback look like that is successful for the mentee to provide to a mentor? Because I can only imagine that, especially, most mentor-mentee pairing is rather experienced against more junior. And so there's kind of that dynamic there, right, that's very much at play. So I would imagine it'd be very scary to give feedback that's actually meaningful, especially if it's not quite right or not quite connecting. So advice to that. How do we better that communication, that feedback from mentee to mentor?
It starts at the very beginning. You have to make sure that your mentee feels comfortable giving you that feedback, because it's pointless if you're just saying, like, do this, do that, da 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 da, this is how to do this, and they can't tell you that, oh, I actually don't understand what you're saying. You have to establish that right at the beginning of the relationship, that it's okay. And also let them know, like, this is how I like feedback. So you can do the sandwich method. Tell me 2 things I've done great, and and then in the middle, then you say, like, this was bad, or like, I didn't understand this, or can you try this in a different way? But it's super important at the very beginning of that mentor-mentee relationship to establish great lines of communication and that openness and honesty.
The sandwich method, I like it.
Yeah, so whenever I bring on a new mentee, basically like on the first days, I make sure to communicate with them. It's like, okay, like we virtually sit down because it's over Zoom, and I just tell them, okay, so you're part of this program. You're an inexperienced developer. I know you don't know anything. You know you don't know anything. The whole group that the company knows you don't know anything. So say you don't know something, because you are expected to not know this stuff. Don't sweat it. Everyone knows you don't know it. So just say it. Say you don't know something, and it's okay. And also, it's okay to work slow. You're inexperienced. The whole point of this is for you to learn and grow. So work at a good, don't worry about just throwing out code out there. Just, work on it and say you don't understand stuff. Say when you need help, and time box yourself too. It's like, if you're working on it longer than X amount of time, you need to send a message to me that, you need some help. And that's like, it's like setting that expectation and letting them know, I know you don't know anything, so you need to tell me when you don't know something, helps a lot. And I hope, and that's like something, so if someone tells you that, take it to heart. And if they haven't told you, just tell them you don't know something. Like, just, that's the most important thing when you're a mentee.
So we got clear outcomes, establishing those up front, making sure we got really clear expectations around the dynamic that we've got going, a good model for either having a plan or having some sort of objectives there, a model around providing feedback bidirectionally from both the mentee to mentor, mentor to mentee. So let's bring this around to, unless John, you add any other thoughts to any of that? Yeah, please.
You mentioned how it's important to for them to tell you how they want feedback, but it's also important for you as a mentor to figure out how they like to learn, because if they're a visual learner and you're not drawing anything for them, you might be wasting each other's time. So
yeah, it's interesting to start from that vantage point. What I love so far, and I hope you're all hearing this out here too, is how much active collaboration around the experience is happening up front, right? So that as a mentor, you're not walking into the dynamic assuming that it has to go one way or be done one particular way. Because I don't know about you, but raise your hand if you've ever been in a pairing or a mentor-mentee relationship where the other person, you just didn't connect with them. Yeah, I mean, it's it's incredibly common for you just to not gain that connection, just not have it. And there's probably a ton of great information that's getting transacted back and forth, but it just ain't clicking. So like taking the time to really understand on both sides, like what that looks like is beautiful. I love that. So we got clear outcomes, we got the learning model. So we've got a model for feedback and advice. I want to talk more about creating psychological safety and trust. Because without that, the whole thing can fall apart, right? And I'm honing in a little bit on your former experiences, John, as you were talking about, like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like, that's what I was feeling. That's how I was interpreting it. It's like not feeling, I'm going to just use the word safe in this dynamic to be who I am and limited experience as I have against you, and therefore I don't really feel safe to say, I really don't know that thing. So going back to there, I want to revisit that moment again. I hope this doesn't bring you to tears on Oprah Winfrey's show. But I want to know what could have been done differently specifically to have built better trust so that you felt like you could have been more open about where you were at. And please, anyone else, if you have thoughts on this or personal experiences, by all means.
Yeah, I mean, I think, this is something I'm still learning how to do with people. I'm definitely not like top of my game here. And I think what you've been saying about setting those expectations up front, talking about how you're going to communicate what the goals are. And I think it probably some more time at the beginning, just talking, not working on code together, not like jumping right into whatever the project is, just to get that human connection, that sync up, that feeling like, oh, I understand this person, they understand me, is going to be useful there. And it's something I tend to skip over when I'm mentoring, because my the tech part of my brain just jumps and is like, let's look at some code. All right, let's do. And I leap to that part of it because that's the part that's really easy. And so like slowing that down at the beginning, I know Betsy Habel has a blog post and I think a talk about pairing. And she talks about the first step about that is like, talk about what your previous experience with pairing has been and what went well, what definitely did not go well, so that you can start up on that footing of, okay, like these sorts of things can be a pitfall for us. I know I have these downsides. You have these things that you're worried about. And then we can start coming together on like how we're going to approach it so that we can avoid those bumps.
Something I can also add to create that sort of psychological safety is, as a mentor, I want to show my mentees the process. So there's obviously that gap of like your mentee being more junior and you being more senior. And something that my mentor did for me was he showed me process. He was the director of engineering at Shopify. I was just fresh out of college. There was a lot that I could learn from him, but instead of just being on his high horse and just saying, yes, one day you can be like me, he showed me the process. He showed me how he came from a educational background. Actually, he was a teacher, he was a professor before, and how he started, and he was first like a developer, and then he did this and that to be able to go to that position, and then moved on. And he really walked me through the process, and that made me feel so comfortable because it just made the end goal so attainable for me. And I think that that is something that's important, to show process and to also let people know that process takes time, and they can get comfortable with the fact that it might take time, but they'll get their end goal eventually.
Any other thoughts?
I'll say
Yeah,
one thing.
let's do it.
Part of it, well, it doesn't short, but in imparting in them, it's okay to make mistakes, because it's like, yeah, you're mentoring them and all that type of stuff, and like they're learning and stuff like that. But also just making it safe for them to be wrong, and then for you to educate them on the best practices or whatever the process is, but making them feel comfortable with it being wrong, and also you remembering that they're learning and it's okay for them to be wrong, and not to chastise for them, and educate them how they're wrong and the process in which they can lead to a better conclusion.
It feels like this takes a ton of time. Does it take a ton of time? It can.
More than you'd think.
More than I think. Okay. So there's a problem, I think, that some believe, which is it takes too much time, more than it's worth. Is that a fair argument? Or how would we work against that? Is there ever more time than it's worth?
I would just speak for the company that I work with. It's the mentorship part of it is an expectation of like our job, like it's baked into our culture. So I never feel like I'm wasting time.
A core
in that
asset.
setting, particular.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would I'm not sure how I would argue against someone who came at me with that, but I feel like within a company context, even like there's no such thing as that wasted time. You're building a relationship with a coworker. You're leveling them up at whatever speed you can, and they're getting better, and that's a good thing. Like, I like that sort of, to me, that comes sort of against like it's sort of a nonsense question, because building a relationship and helping people get better is a good thing. And you're asking why that's a good thing, and I don't have an answer, because it just is.
Yeah, if they ask that question, the answer to that is, did you ever work at a toxic workplace? And if the answer is yes, did they do mentoring? They probably didn't. And so poor mentorship leads to toxic work environments. That's it.
I love all those answers. So, but let's talk in a more practical sense about what really does the time commitment look like, and not from a critical standpoint, but just objectively. So I know that all of you have had a lot of time mentoring. Shane, I know especially you have as well. So let's just talk like, what is a weekly schedule allotment of time? How do you kind of think about that from that perspective? Like, are we generally talking about handful, like an hour or so on a Monday, and then sort of like Slack communication during the week? Or are we talking about full-time pairing? Like, what's the model look like? And I guess Shane or anybody, by all means, like, what do you see?
It's flexible where I work, and so it just really depends on the dynamic of the relationship. So for me personally, it's probably like a bi-weekly, sometimes even monthly commitment for an hour, where you're checking in with each other. But it really depends.
Does it generally sway more towards like being more time or less time in general? Like, would that represent like it sounded like about an hour to 2 hours a month-ish, something like that? More than that?
I would say maybe, yeah.
Okay.
4 hours.
So when it kind of like swings one direction or other, do you tend to add more time on average, or do you tend to do less?
It actually really depends, especially if that person is on my personal team and we're working like every day with each other, and I can easily see spots where this person could grow or improve, then that 4 hour a month could easily explode.
Yeah, so out of convenience, being in proximity to the same project, you can kind of add in quite easy. Okay, that makes sense. John, did you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the context in which I'm familiar with it at work would be like, especially like a new junior starting out. And in that case, it's generally starts with like multiple hours per day for the first few weeks, right? They're onboarding, they're learning a billion things through that period. So like the more contact, the better. And then, as they sort of build up some of those basic skills, you can taper that off, over the next series of months until it's in a much less frequent, like maybe it's once a week, maybe it's twice a week, something like that. So it really depends. And then eventually it sort of turns into people are around, ask for help when you need help, rather than like a scheduled time.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. What time are we at actually right now? I've totally took my watch off. Okay. The last things I wanted to really hone in on were to just get really clear with, if I was drawn to be a mentor and I'm not currently, is there any prerequisites, any resources that I should look to first to gain more insight, or is it let's dive into the deep end of the pool? What do you feel? Is there that kind of like precursor, pre-training, pre-process to mentorship that's valuable?
for me. I was very active in the community and volunteering. So most of my organic relationships happen through those experiences. And I would start doing that even when I was a junior. So it's, yeah, like, and also my, I guess, greatest mentor that I can think of, I met him at, I took a girls develop it like course on how to code, learn how to code or whatever. And I'm not really, I lost my train of thought, but through community.
Just getting involved in the
Yeah,
community to start, even as a junior developer, and just kind of like, I'm assuming, just build the exercise of connection. And was that kind of a big part of the outcome, especially from when you were a junior developer building community? Was it to just kind of understand the community at large and the nature and dynamic of other people around it, or did you have more intentionality behind it at all?
At the time, I think I was just very eager and I wanted
Okay.
to learn, and I wanted, like, that's also super, I think, important. If you have a mentee that isn't demonstrating their eagerness, at least for me, it can be a little bit demotivating, because then you also see them not really progressing,
Mhm.
and that's also demotivating. And then I've had poor relationships before where it just kind of like I internalize it. I do think I need like to reflect and think about those relationships and how I could have done better to foster this type of person in the future, but it doesn't always work out. And I think sometimes it's also important to know when it's time to call it quits. Like there can be an exit plan, and that should be okay.
Hmm.
Or you might be able to refer them to someone else that might better suit them.
Mhm.
Again, I'm tangent.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it. No, I think it's great. Yeah, because I think there's a lot of people who are interested in it. I think, unfortunately, some of that is kind of ego-based. Like, I want to be the mentor. I want to be the mentor. But I actually think, especially in the Ruby community, which has been incredibly supportive of one another, I'm amazed by the talks and the talk content and the Scholar and Guide program, like all of that as being so supportive to one another. And what I loved, especially about what you said, was talking about starting early, right? That I'm one that's believed this, that you can be a mentor to somebody regardless of that experience hierarchy. Just because I don't have senior in my title doesn't mean that I can't be a mentor to somebody else, that you can absolutely do that. And so I just loved honing in on that and getting involved in the community first, learning from the community, and just kind of growing up from there. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's that point that you made just there about the difference in time and difference in seniority is a huge one. Like, I think, like I was talking about in that initial experience I had back in high school, a 50-year experience gap is hard to bridge unless the person has done a lot of work to learn how to bridge that and to have that beginner's mind again. But if you've been a year in your first job and you're mentoring someone who's just finishing their boot camp, like, you're right there with them. You know what they're going through. You remember not remembering how the active record queries work. And so that's going to be a lot actually more effective, because you can guide them through those same thought processes, and you can empathize a lot more with where they've come from. And so, again, starting early, I think, is great, because A, you build up the skills, and B, you're helping those people by being super relatable.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I jumped into mentorship like, boop, I'll do it. And I should have prepared more. I think I've learned a lot over the years, but I probably did a disservice to some of those people at the beginning, because I was just like, well, I know Rails, so that's all I need to know. Boom. But there's more to it. I think we've talked about a lot of that today. So spending a little more time to think about how you want to do it, and that pre-work, I think, is going to be really helpful.
And I think one last thing that I'll mention is also knowing your why. So for me, when I think about mentorship, I think about my two hands, and I think about the fact that someone is holding my hand and mentoring me, and I want to be there to hold someone else's hand and mentor them. And so, like, that is something that definitely motivated me to get into mentorship and all of that. And then the second thing that I want to mention is that if you're thinking of getting into mentorship, you need to really invest time in learning how to communicate properly, because all of that is useless if you cannot communicate, if that bridge of communication is not there, and not just communication, but effective communication, if that's not there, then a lot of the work is useless and it will fall to the ground if that's not there.
Yeah, I think empathy. So I think that was kind of like touched on, but like, having empathy for others so you can relate to them and come down to their level. And if you're thinking about doing mentorship too, think about your story of like how you became an engineer or where you're at right now. And because you could be a mentor not in the technical sense, like, within the company, you could be a career mentor. You can provide advice about the career path. Being a person of color, being, coming, going from high school to community college to, to getting a degree. There's someone there could be someone in high school that can't get admitted into a four-year university and thinks it's already the end of the world. You could be their mentor about, no, go to a boot camp school. You could go to the community college. So think about your story and think about how your story could help others.
I honestly really love that because it's kind of part of my story. So I'm also involved in mentoring girls in high school that want to get into STEM careers. And it's really because, like, for me in university, I didn't see a lot of people who looked like me, and I just felt like out of place. So then I decided, like, if I'm gonna mentor, I'm gonna be there for those girls that feel out of place or don't see people that look like them. So that's definitely a motivation for me.
Well, I want to wrap it up here with one last question I think I already know the answer to, but I'll start at the end, John, and work our way down. Did you feel 100% ready to mentor someone else before you started?
Yes, but it was unjustified.
Perfect. Yeah.
My answer is no, but then I had the willingness to actually just teach someone what I had learned. So I wasn't qualified, but I was willing.
Definitely no.
Yeah, definitely no also.
Okay, so my challenge to all of you and all of you watching is take the opportunity to step out on a ledge for a minute and ask yourself, is there something you know how to do that could help somebody else? I love the idea of having two hands. And second to that is, who do you need support from? What is it that you might need, whether it's career path, as Eric's talking about, whether it's certain areas of knowledge, and know that this is a community that can support one another. And if we combine those two things together, people who want to give and people who need support, then surprise, surprise, it'll all come together and support one another. And I want to heavily encourage all of us to really look out for those that are just getting started. This is an ecosystem that's so heavily built or continues to live on those that have found some level of success by other accounts. And those that are just now getting into it, it's a scary, scary time. I don't know if you remember that yourself. I certainly do. A very long, relatively long period of time ago. And I remember my first mentors, and they didn't even realize they were my mentors at the time, but they were pivotal in giving me those first experiences that brought me into the fold, made me feel like I could be a part of this thing, even though I knew very little, if not nothing at all. So I want to highly encourage each and every one of us to take a minute and consider the role we can play in each other's lives in this way. You don't have to stand on a stage and give a talk. You don't even have to carry a senior title. You don't have to be assigned it in your job. You can do this day in and day out for 5 minutes here or 50 there, and you can do it all the time and support each other. With that, thank you so much. Thank you to our panelists. If I could have a round of applause for our panelists today. Yes. Janice, one more thing.
Unfortunately, I just remembered this, but one way that you could start is just by scheduling office hours that you can invite anyone to. I started doing this with one of the boot camps that I volunteer for sometimes. Learn Academy. And sometimes people don't come, but there have been people that do, and that's a great way to open yourself up to people.
Great. Perfect. So start with office hours. Speaking of Learn Academy, if you need more direct support on how to institute a mentorship program, I am a part of Learn Academy. I'm more than happy to help. You can come see me or anybody that's worked with us. Head up to the Career Pathways room. But aside from that, thank you so much for being here. And with that, Chelsea, I pass the mic back to you.
I told them I would take number 3. Thank you guys so much for being here this afternoon. Can we give these guys another round of applause?